It was Thanksgiving, and I pulled up to the driveway with the low rumble of my truck echoing across the gravel, the scent of pine from the nearby woods mingling with the faint aroma of wood smoke drifting from the chimney. In my gloved hand, I held a bottle of aged scotch, 12-year single malt, its label worn just enough to hint at value. And I wore my cleanest flannel shirt, the one Alina liked to call respectable against the riffraff, and a pair of polished leather boots that thudded against the gravel as I stepped out. I could hear laughter filtering through the house, muffled voices, polite clinks of glassware, and the soft hum of Alina's family greeting one another. Normally, a holiday at her parents' felt like stepping into a carefully choreographed performance where every guest was a prop and every smile had been cross-checked for authenticity. Today, though, I wasn't sure which role I was expected to play. My heart thudded against my ribs with a familiar mix of pride and unease as I walked up to the front door. Alina stood there, slender in a tailored dress that matched her mother's preference for neutral tones. Beige, champagne, and the occasional flash of gold in her jewelry. Her hair was pinned back perfectly, not a strand out of place. She met my eyes without smiling and motioned with a gesture as crisp as a conductor's baton. "Guests are arriving through the front," she said, her voice low but clear. "You've been working. You understand, right?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. My mind flickered to the dozen emails I'd sent before dawn, spreadsheets tracking rent rolls, invoices for new repairs, and meeting notes with the city building department that would finalize permits on a project I'd poured blood and sweat into. Exhaustion tugged at my shoulders, but I straightened up, lifting my chin. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice steady. I lifted the scotch and offered it to her as an olive branch. She didn't hesitate. She took it from my hand, and our fingers brushed briefly, an electric moment I recognized but refused to acknowledge. I nodded and pivoted away from the front entrance. Gravel crunched under my boots as I circled around the side of the house, noticing the new landscaping her father had insisted on: trimmed hedges, manicured shrubs, and a cobblestone pathway laid last summer, which Alina's parents treated like a grand statement to their refined taste. I felt a familiar pang of irony. All that effort to craft an image of genteel affluence while they thought they controlled every narrative about my life, where I came from, what I did for a living, how I wasn't truly one of them. Approaching the kitchen door, I paused and took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs, mingling with the warmth that seeped from the house. I lifted my boots onto the threshold, stepping inside like one of the hired help they thought I might be. My flannel and boots made the uniform feel real. In that moment, I tasted the tension in my own mouth, equal parts bitterness and resolve. I shut the door behind me, and the dinner party din rose to greet me. Silverware clattering, voices raised in polite laughter. I slid into the kitchen, the wall of warmth and chatter washing over me. The kitchen island was a granite slab anchored in the middle of a spotless, stainless steel workspace. I eased onto one of the high stools, my back ramrod straight, feeling every eye on me. Though no one acknowledged my presence, I set my scotch down and unbuttoned my flannel at the collar, loosening the tension in my neck. My eyes flicked to the row of turkey platters on the counter, cranberry relish in a crystal bowl, and mashed potatoes steaming in a huge white tureen. The scent of roasting meat clung to the air, laced with sage and rosemary. I thought of the jokes Alina's parents would crack in a few minutes about how their son-in-law still thought people like me needed to prove something by carrying expensive liquor as a peace offering. I looked up when her mother, Cynthia, swept into the kitchen, her eyes glinting behind a string of pearls that probably cost more than my truck. She paused when she saw me sitting there, leaning back to smooth her heavy cardigan. "Oh," she started, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't realize you'd, opted for kitchen service today." She gestured toward the dining room, where chandeliers hung like jeweled pendants from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over every polished surface. The table was set for a dozen, with silken napkins folded into art and crystalline wine glasses waiting to be filled. I kept my expression neutral. "I'm just making sure everything's taken care of," I said. My words were as cool as ice, but beneath that, my pulse hammered. I'd been to enough events here to know what she meant. I was to be invisible until they needed me to refill platters or pour wine. I undid the top button of my flannel further. "Looks like you've got plenty of help," I added, nodding toward the cluster of catering staff entering with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Her lips pursed. She tilted her head toward the pantry. Frank, she began, using the name Alina's father reserved for me when he thought no one else was listening, will manage. And then she swept past, glossy heels clicking, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I took a swig of scotch, burning, smoky, exactly how I liked it, and let it steady me. My reflection stared back from the stainless steel backsplash. Dark eyes narrowed, a strong jawline set with determination, and a hint of anger bubbling beneath the surface. I turned my attention to the countertop, where a half-finished turkey sandwich lay wrapped in wax paper, the edges of the bread soaked with juices and gravy. I unwrapped it, my fingers brushing the soft crust, and took a bite. The bread was dry despite the moisture from the meat, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction. If they wanted to pretend I was a servant, I could dwell in their kitchens for a while. Maybe let them forget that I was the one who owned the building they claimed as their family home. No one greeted me. The guests walking from the foyer to the dining room paused to stare as I chewed, confusion flickering in their eyes. Alina's parents, Margot and Marcel, were entertaining a small group of neighbors in the next room, their voices rich with forced cordiality. I heard them laughing about non-essential things. The weather, how Connie from down the street had brought the best pumpkin pie, how Marcel's golf game still wasn't what it used to be. A laugh bubbled behind my ribs, bitter and precise. They'd laughed at me for years, calling me blue-collar lucky at family barbecues, suggesting I find a real job when I explained commercial real estate was my passion. They never invited me into their world. They just never let me leave their judgment. I swallowed the rest of the sandwich, enjoying the sensation of tearing into something they thought was beneath me. They hadn't invited me to join the festive tableau in the dining room, dancing under those glittering chandeliers. Instead, they relegated me to a corner of the kitchen island, like a background character in the story they wanted to tell their acquaintances. But I wasn't merely the help. I glanced at the framed photos on the refrigerator. Pictures of Alina's family vacations to Vail, the annual New Year's Eve gala where my name wasn't whispered in polite circles. They didn't know who I truly was. They didn't know I had built an empire of commercial properties across the state, that my company, Rhodes and Lynn Property Group, held leases that paid for those chandeliers. I took another sip of scotch, feeling liquid courage burn its way down my esophagus. In a few moments, the doorbell would ring again and new guests would arrive, each one stepping through that front door under the impression that everyone invited held the same social currency. They believed in the narrative Alina's family had sculpted, that I was an outsider, a blue-collar husband who made enough money to keep his wife comfortably in line but not enough to challenge their supremacy. They didn't know that by the time the mashed potatoes had been cleared, their carefully curated facade would begin to crumble. I placed the empty bottle on the counter and straightened. I reached into my pocket for my phone, thumb hovering over the silent button. I wished for a moment that I could simply send a single text to announce my presence as more than a guest who entered through the kitchen. But that moment belonged to a future I planned carefully, when their pride lay in ruins and the truth could stand on its own. For now, I finished the last of my sandwich, stood, straightened the collar of my flannel, and waited, silent, unacknowledged, and potent, like a glass of scotch placed casually on a table where no one dared take a sip. I was halfway through that dry turkey sandwich, its brittle edges crumbling between my teeth, when I heard the front door open. The sound carried through the house with the kind of authority that demanded everyone pause mid-conversation, mid-laughter, mid-judgment. I didn't even have to turn my head to know who it was. That voice, deep, warm, rich with years of negotiation and command, rolled into the kitchen like a tide, carrying the scent of money and influence with it. "That smell better be your mother's stuffing," the voice boomed, and I felt a smile tug at my lips despite the tension that sat like a stone in my stomach. I glanced up just as Terrence Knox stepped into the kitchen, his presence eclipsing the room like a solar flare. His hair, silver at the temples, caught the light from the overhead chandelier, giving him a regal air that matched the tailored navy suit he wore like a second skin. He paused when he saw me, eyes crinkling with familiarity that no one else in that house seemed to share. "Boss," he said, the single word loaded with an easy confidence that carried weight in every boardroom from Boston to San Francisco. The kitchen fell silent. Even the oven seemed to hush its hum. I held his gaze and let the moment breathe, let it settle like fine dust on an antique shelf. Then I stood, pushing the stool back with the scrape of metal on tile, and extended my hand. "Good to see you, Terrence," I said, my voice calm, the calm of a man who knew the difference between being ignored and being recognized. His grin widened as he clasped my hand in a firm shake, his other hand clapping my shoulder like an old friend. "Didn't expect to see you here today," he said, loud enough for the voices in the dining room to hear. The chandelier rattled as if it had heard something scandalous. The kitchen had grown so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of the old clock above the pantry door. Behind Terrence, I saw Alina, her face drained of color like someone had wrung her out like a dish rag. Her mouth hung open, the wine glass in her hand trembling just enough to send a thin thread of liquid down the stem. She stared at me as though I'd suddenly grown horns. Her father, Marcel, stood half in, half out of the dining room, his napkin still in his hand. He let out a nervous, strangled laugh that died in his throat. Her mother, Cynthia, clutched the back of a dining chair like a lifeline. Her knuckles were white. I watched them all, every last one of them, as the words hung there like a noose. "Boss." Terrence leaned in, oblivious to the tension in the room or maybe enjoying it. "Listen, that deal we closed in Burlington? I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice lower now, though still loud enough for every lurking ear to catch. "Rhodes and Lynn made that possible. I've been telling everyone, if they want real estate done right in this state, they call you." My chest felt like it might burst from the satisfaction and the slow, seeping ache of a truth finally revealed. I could feel Alina's eyes on me, wide and shocked. I didn't look at her yet. Instead, I shrugged, as if it were all in a day's work. "Glad to help," I said, my voice a quiet contrast to the thunderous silence that had fallen. Terrence glanced around, as if just realizing the room's atmosphere had shifted from jovial to stunned. He turned back to me with a puzzled look. "Wait, didn't realize the kitchen was this dead tonight," he said, gesturing to the turkey and the empty plates. "Usually, your in-laws keep the caterers on their toes." That last word, caterers, hit the air like a punch. Alina's mother inhaled sharply, her eyes darting to her husband, who looked like he'd just bitten into a lemon. Alina's lips parted, but no sound came out. I felt something old and buried, some mixture of humiliation and vindication, twist in my gut. For years, they'd treated me like the help, like the handyman who got lucky. They'd let their condescension slip into every conversation, every dinner invitation. Now, Terrence's grin was the exclamation point at the end of a sentence I'd been writing in silence. I turned my head slowly, my eyes locking onto Alina's. Her mouth moved, searching for a word, an explanation, anything that would smooth over this moment. But there was no smoothing it over. The wine glass in her hand slipped a fraction lower, her fingers trembling against the delicate stem. Her father's laugh, when it came, was brittle and too quick. "Well, that's quite the surprise," he stammered. "Didn't realize you two were so close." Terrence turned his head toward Marcel, his eyebrows shooting up in amusement. "Close," he echoed. "Hell, I wouldn't have made half the deals I did this year without Rhodes and Lynn behind me. Your son-in-law here's got an empire that most people would kill to be part of." The room shuddered under the weight of that word. Empire. My heart beat faster as I scanned the faces around me, Alina, her parents, the cousins and family friends lurking just beyond the kitchen doorway. Each expression was a cocktail of disbelief, envy, and the slow dawning horror that maybe they'd misjudged the man they'd tried to sideline. I crossed my arms over my chest, letting the strength of that truth settle into my bones. For the first time that night, I felt tall, really tall, like every inch of me was standing on top of every insult they'd ever thrown my way. Terrence didn't notice the tension. Maybe he did and just didn't care. He leaned closer, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Listen, boss, I've got a couple projects coming up that might interest you. I'll text you the details." He clapped me on the shoulder again, then turned toward the dining room, his voice booming. "Hey, don't hog all the stuffing. Save some for me." His voice trailed off as he disappeared into the dining room, leaving the kitchen in stunned silence. I felt every eye turn back to me. Alina stood frozen, her lips pressed together, her eyes bright, with something between apology and fear. Her father shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed in his neck. I let the silence stretch, each second a lesson I'd waited years to teach them. Finally, I lifted my chin, letting my eyes find Alina's. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just let the truth fill the space between us. I was no longer the man who needed their approval. I was the man they should have never underestimated. She looked at me like she'd never seen me before. like she didn't know what to do with the reality that had just exploded in the middle of her carefully arranged life. I let her look. I let them all look. Because now, the cracks had started to form, and I wasn't going to stop until the whole facade crumbled. Terrence pulled out one of the high stools beside me and plopped down like he owned the place. His presence felt like a thunderstorm, electric, unpredictable, a force that drew everyone's gaze. He leaned back and launched into a story about Burlington's biggest new development, weaving details about city permits and high-rise apartments as if we were the only two people in the room. The kitchen felt like a fishbowl, every person in the adjacent dining room craning their necks to catch pieces of his tail, their polite conversation evaporating under the weight of his authority. "You know that waterfront deal?" he said, his voice rolling with a casual power that filled the space between us. "I couldn't have closed that without your company. Rhodes and Lynn made the whole thing possible. The city planners were eating out of my hand, thanks to the paperwork you streamlined. Every time I needed a signature, you were there. Every time I needed a permit fast-tracked, you got it. And let's not forget that little union hiccup. Poof, gone in a day." He laughed, the sound sharp and full of a pride that belonged to both of us, though I knew better than to let it show. Alina stood by the sink, her hands trembling on a glass she'd been rinsing for too long. Water dripped steadily into the sink, the rhythmic patter filling the silence between his words. Her father, Marcel, leaned in the doorway, his jaw slack and his eyes darting between me and Terrence. Her mother, Cynthia, clutched a dish towel like a lifeline, her knuckles white. "You." Marcel's voice cracked like drywood. "You own buildings?" His tone was thin, forced, like he was asking about a secret he'd rather not hear confirmed. I took a slow bite of stuffing from the plate in front of me. Its earthy richness, sage, butter, the faint tang of onion, filled my mouth, grounding me. I swallowed, then met his eyes with the same calm I'd practiced for years. "Several," I said, my voice low but steady, every syllable carved from the granite of my own resolve. Silence. It rippled outward from the kitchen like a stone dropped into a still lake, spreading shock and discomfort in its wake. The dining room beyond seemed to have turned to stone, all eyes on us, every breath suspended. I saw Alina's sister, Grace, her lips parted, wine glass frozen halfway to her mouth, as if she'd been caught mid-sentence. I saw Uncle Ron, who'd once called me just a guy who lucked into Alina's good graces, his face slack with disbelief. Terrence, oblivious or delighting in the show, leaned forward and slapped his palm on the counter. "Hell, I'd trust Rhodes and Lynn with any deal I've got. Nobody knows the ins and outs of property management like you. Even my competitors are calling me, asking who's handling my buildings. I tell them straight, talk to him. He's the reason I'm ahead of schedule and under budget." The words crackled through the air, louder than any accusation, sharper than any insult they'd ever thrown my way. I could see it written across every face, the realization that they'd been talking to a man they'd dismissed too easily, that the blue-collar guy with the flannel shirt and the boots wasn't just Alina's husband, but the reason they'd all enjoyed a cushy Thanksgiving in a house whose foundation I could have bought and sold a dozen times over. Alina's mother's lips trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "We," she started, but the words died in her throat. Her gaze flicked to Marcel, seeking some explanation, some apology that would make this easier to swallow. But Marcel had none to give. His eyes were locked on me like he'd just discovered a wolf in his dining room, one he'd mistaken for a stray dog. I let the silence stretch. I let it breathe, because power isn't about shouting. It's about letting the truth settle so deeply in a room that it changes the air itself. Terrence, in his unstoppable way, kept talking. "Remember the Burlington project?" he said, his voice lifting in pitch, as if the memory itself were a trophy. "I had those city inspectors crawling up my ass, pardon my French," he added with a wink towards Cynthia, who blanched. "And who handled it? This guy? He knows every zoning law, every loophole, every commissioner's secretary by name. He's the man you want in your corner, trust me." He turned back to me, eyes gleaming. "And hey, I owe you a dinner, big guy. Whatever you want, name the restaurant. Ruth's Chris, Trattoria Rustica, anywhere." I smiled, just a small tilt of my lips, the kind that never reached my eyes. "I'll take you up on that," I said. And I would. Because I'd earned every inch of respect he was giving me. Alina's eyes burned holes in the side of my head. I could feel her gaze like a brand. She'd wanted me to stay small, to slip through the back door, to sit quietly in the kitchen while her family passed judgment from their crystal kingdom. And now? Now she saw that the man she'd married wasn't the man she'd invited to dinner. He was something else, something she'd never quite grasped. Terrence leaned back and stretched, oblivious to the tension, his grin broad and toothy. Man, I didn't expect to run into you here. Thought you'd be too busy signing contracts to come to this. No offense, Cynthia. He gestured at the house with a casual flick of his wrist. She flinched. No offense, she muttered, but her voice trembled. Terrence's grin turned sly. Well, I'm glad you're here, he said, slapping the counter one last time before hopping off the stool. This place could use a little real power in the room. He gave me a wink, then sauntered off toward the dining room, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. I turned to face the wreckage he'd left behind. Alina's mother was blinking rapidly, as if trying to wake from a dream. Marcel was still frozen in the doorway, his napkin now crumpled in his hand. Alina herself looked like she'd been hit by a tidal wave, her mouth opening and closing as though the right words might swim into existence if she tried hard enough. But there were no right words. I set down my plate and stood, my boots scraping the tile. I let my gaze sweep the kitchen, the dining room beyond, every face that had ever called me lucky or blue-collar, or the one who married up. They'd never bothered to ask who I really was, what I'd built, how many families relied on the buildings I owned for their homes and businesses. They'd never asked because they'd never cared to look beyond the man who'd taken the back door at their request. Now they knew, and I wasn't done yet. That night, I left before dessert. I didn't even bother with the pumpkin pie or the pecan tarts they always bragged about. I pushed through the front door, not caring if anyone noticed. The porch lights cast harsh shadows on the steps, my boots echoing with every step I took down the walkway. I didn't turn around. Let them watch me leave. Let them wonder how a man who'd been ignored for years could command the attention of Terrence Knox and the respect that came with him. Alina's call started almost as soon as I got in the truck. The first one buzzed against my leg before I even pulled onto the main road. I ignored it, staring at the windshield, where raindrops had started to streak the glass like tears. The second call came 5 minutes later. I let it ring until it went silent. Then again, and again. Her name glowed on the screen like a brand, but I didn't pick up. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to remember who I was before all this, before the forced smiles, the casual humiliations, the dismissals that left bruises you couldn't see. At home, I sat in the living room with the lights off, the darkness like a thick coat I couldn't take off. My boots were still on, leaving wet prints on the hardwood. I didn't care. I leaned back into the couch, letting the quiet settle. My mind replayed every scene from that night, the way her father's face had gone pale when Terrence called me boss, the way her mother's voice had trembled, the way Alina's hand had trembled as she clutched that wine glass. Power isn't loud. It doesn't come with flashing lights or a megaphone. It's quiet, like a slow-building tide that drowns everything in its path before anyone realizes they should have moved to higher ground. I'd spent years letting them talk, letting them laugh at me, letting them think I was just a man who'd lucked into a woman like Alina. I'd let them think I didn't belong in their world. Because sometimes silence was easier. Sometimes it was easier to be underestimated. But that was over now. My phone buzzed again. I let it go to voicemail. Then it buzzed once more, a text. I picked it up and read the screen. From, Alina's mother, we're sorry about tonight. It's been a long week. Please understand. Understand? What was I supposed to understand? That they'd treated me like an outsider, a servant in my own life. That they'd forced me through the back door like I didn't deserve to stand in the same room as them? My thumb hovered over the reply button. I wanted to type something. Anything. But nothing felt right. I set the phone down, letting it buzz one more time before I powered it off completely. The next morning, I woke early, a habit. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the floor. I poured a cup of coffee, its warmth bitter and necessary, and sat at the kitchen table. My inbox was already full, tenants with questions, property managers with updates, a meeting reminder for the project in Burlington. My life. My empire. The thing they'd all dismissed as luck, or a side hustle. I sipped my coffee and smiled. An email popped up, from, Alina's sister, you're overreacting. It was just one night. Don't let this ruin everything. Everything. Funny word. Everything to her was brunches and Pilates classes, family barbecues and golf tournaments. Everything to me was the years I'd spent building something that couldn't be taken away with a snide comment or a forced smile. Everything to me was knowing that every time they called me blue collar, they'd missed the real truth. I was the one who owned the deeds. I didn't reply. Let them think I was silent because I didn't know what to say. Let them think I was still the man who took the back door when they asked. Because power isn't always in the words you say, it's in the words you don't. I got dressed slowly, my boots polished, but still carrying the scuffs of work I was proud of. The mirror reflected a man they didn't recognize, a man they'd never bothered to understand. I combed my hair back, tied the laces tight, and picked up my phone. I scrolled past Alina's missed calls, past her mother's half-hearted apology, past the text from her sister. I paused on Terrence's message from the night before. Terrence knocks. Dinner soon. You name the place. Let's talk projects. Let's talk respect. I smiled. I'd built my world from the ground up, one lease, one deal, one sleepless night at a time. They'd never asked how I did it. They'd never asked what it meant to me to walk into a room like I owned it. Because I did. I stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cold morning air. My breath fogged in front of me, a visible reminder that I was alive, that I'd made it here on my own. The sky stretched above me, wide and open, full of possibility. They'd always laughed at me. They'd always assumed I'd be the man outside their world. But the truth was simpler than that. I wasn't outside their world. I was their world. I was the foundation they didn't even know they were standing on. And when the storm came, I'd be the only one left with a dry roof. I got in my truck and turned the key, the engine rumbling to life like a promise. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't even need their front door, because I knew something they didn't. Every door in their world led to a room I already owned. A week later, Alina's father called me out of the blue. His name flashed across my phone screen with a sense of urgency that made my gut tighten. I hadn't spoken to him since Thanksgiving, hadn't answered any of Alina's calls, hadn't responded to her mother's messages. I'd chosen silence because that's where real power grows, away from their stage, their applause, their manipulations. But the call came anyway, demanding an audience I wasn't sure I wanted to grant. He sounded almost jovial when I answered. Hey, son, we'd like to have you over for dinner. You know, just the family, Alina, her mother, and me. No guests, no show. Just us. The invitation felt like a setup, but my curiosity got the better of me. I agreed, setting the time and place, my voice steady, giving nothing away. When I pulled into their driveway that night, the house glowed with warm light, as though it had never held a cold welcome. I walked up the front steps this time, boots polished, shirt crisp, the same confidence I'd worn at every negotiation table shining in my eyes. Marcel greeted me at the door with a handshake that felt rehearsed, his smile forced and stretched too wide. Alina hovered behind him, her eyes rimmed with worry, her lips pressed into a tight line like she'd been practicing how to look sorry. Inside, the table was set for 4, white linen napkins, polished silverware, a centerpiece of lilies that looked like they'd come from a florist on short notice. A bottle of wine sat unopened, a decoy for the real reason I was here. Marcel gestured for me to sit, and I obliged, folding into the chair like I belonged at every head table he'd ever hosted. Dinner was a formality, dry chicken, overcooked asparagus, a side of tension that neither the wine nor the forced small talk could wash away. Marcel waited until the plates were cleared before he leaned back in his chair, his smile suddenly shifting from polite to businesslike. I recognized that smile from boardrooms, the one that comes right before the ask. We wanted to talk to you about something, he began, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Alina's eyes darted to him, and then back to me, her mouth opening as if to interject, but she stayed silent. Her mother sat stiffly, her wine glass untouched, her fingers trembling slightly as she held it. Go ahead, I said, my tone flat, unreadable. Marcel cleared his throat. We've been working on a new development idea. Something big. It's an opportunity we think you'd want to be a part of. He paused, as though expecting me to jump in, to clap him on the back, to thank him for including me in his plans. I didn't. I let him keep talking. It's a mixed-use development downtown, he continued, his voice gathering steam. Retail on the bottom, apartments on top, maybe some office space if the zoning allows it. The numbers are impressive. The projections look strong. We've got interest from a few investors, but we need a key partner to bring it all together. Someone with experience. He said the word like it tasted sour on his tongue. I watched him carefully. I'd spent years studying people, learning when they were bluffing and when they were bleeding. Tonight, he was both. And what's my role in this? I asked, keeping my voice calm, like I was discussing a lease renewal instead of a lifetime of respect. Marcel shifted uncomfortably. Well, obviously, you'd bring capital. And your contacts, Terrence, others. We'd bring the land and the design. He slid a manila folder across the table like a bribe. I opened it, scanning the glossy renderings, the financials laid out like a buffet of promises. But all I saw was desperation hiding behind the veneer of opportunity. Let me get this straight, I said, flipping through the pages. You want me to risk everything I've built, my company, my reputation, on a scheme you just thought of? Marcel bristled. It's not a scheme, he said, his tone sharp enough to cut. It's a family opportunity. We grow together. I met his eyes, letting my gaze hold steady until he shifted under its weight. Didn't feel like family last Thursday, I said, the memory of that night in the kitchen as fresh as the scotch I'd left untouched. Alina's eyes glistened with tears. She reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled it back before she could touch me. We just want things to go back to normal, she whispered. Dad didn't mean to. I shook my head. Normal for you was me at the kitchen counter while you all laughed in the dining room. Normal was you asking me to use the back door while guests walked through the front. Normal was you never correcting them when they called me lucky, like I hadn't built this life with my own two hands. Marcel's face reddened, his jaw clenched tight. You're being dramatic, he snapped. This is business. You're good at business. Let's put the past behind us. I stood, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor like a final note. You don't get to put the past behind us just because it's convenient now, I said. You built that past. Every time you called me son, with that patronizing tone. Every time you smirked when I came home in my work boots. Every time you made me feel like an outsider in my own life. That was you laying the bricks of this moment. Alina's tears spilled over now, her hands trembling as she reached for me again. Please, she said, her voice cracking. We can fix this. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a woman who'd never questioned the story her family told her about who I was. A woman who'd never once asked who I really was or what I'd been building all these years. No, I said quietly. You can't fix this with a dinner invitation and a manila folder. I closed the folder, leaving it on the table like a dead weight. Marcel stared at it, his mouth open but no words coming. I turned and walked out, my boots heavy on the polished wood floor, every step a reminder that I wasn't leaving the way I'd arrived. I walked out the front door, head high. No apologies, no regrets. Because the truth was, I never needed their validation. I built my own empire while they built excuses. And tonight, they'd show me exactly who they were and who I'd never be again. It started with a phone call, anonymous, clipped, a voice I didn't recognize. Mr. Rhodes? This is the housing board. We've had a complaint about one of your buildings on 3rd Street, something about fire code violations. The voice dripped with forced politeness, but I could hear the undertone. They were fishing for something. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the city skyline, the rooftops of the buildings I'd spent years collecting like trophies. Fire code violations? I repeated, keeping my voice steady. Which one? Unit 214, the voice replied. Papers rustled in the background, the shuffle of someone assembling a half-formed case. We'll be scheduling an inspection. I could hear it then. The rehearsed way he said scheduling an inspection, like he was reading from a script. I thanked him and hung up. A minute later, an email from my insurance agent pinged into my inbox. We've received a few concerning reports about your properties, anonymous calls. Let's schedule a time to discuss coverage. I felt my pulse quicken, my mind sorting through the possibilities. It wasn't just one complaint, it was the beginning of a pattern. A coordinated effort to make me sweat, to force my hand, to remind me that they still thought they held the strings. I could practically see Marcel's face, his forced smile from the dinner table, the way he presented that family opportunity like it was an olive branch instead of a leash. My phone buzzed again. This time it was one of my property managers, voice tight with worry. Hey, boss, I just had a couple tenants call me. Someone's been reaching out to them, asking if you've been pressuring them to sign renewals or threatening them about rent. They didn't know what to say, so they called me. What's going on? I exhaled slowly, the bitterness coating my tongue. They were playing the oldest game in the book. Sowing doubt, rattling cages, making people question the stability they'd come to rely on me for. But they'd underestimated one thing. I'd been documenting every transaction, every email, every signature since the day I bought my first building. Tell them the truth, I said. I've never threatened anyone about rent. I've never pressured anyone to sign anything. I don't need to. My voice was even, but inside, a fire burned. After I hung up, I turned to my computer and pulled up a folder labeled Compliance. It was all there: maintenance logs, inspection reports, contractor invoices, even photos of every completed repair and upgrade. I learned early on that paperwork was my best shield. Every time someone questioned my integrity, I had proof. I opened another folder, this one labeled Communications. Every letter, every email, every text that confirmed my business was above board. If they wanted to come after me, they'd have to wade through a mountain of receipts and signatures. It wasn't just the calls or the sudden scrutiny from the housing board. The real attack came in whispers, the fake reviews that popped up online, anonymous accounts with no history, leaving one-star ratings with vague accusations. Unsafe building, one read. Manager pressures tenants. Another claimed, fire hazard, stay away. I clicked through them, one by one, each as transparent as the last. I knew who was behind them, or at least who'd ordered them. Marcel might not have dialed the numbers himself, but his fingerprints were all over this. He'd underestimated me again, thinking I'd cave under the weight of his campaign. The next morning, I walked into my office, a small, efficient space with exposed brick and tall windows that let the sun pour in. My assistant, Kendra, handed me a stack of messages. "You've got calls from 3 different agencies asking about your buildings," she said, her brow furrowed. "And someone left this." She slid an envelope across the desk, no name on the front. I picked it up, weighing it in my hand. The seal was cheap, the kind you get in bulk at the office supply store. I tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a typed list of supposed violations at various properties. No letterhead, no signature, just a bullet-pointed threat. At the bottom, in bold, was one line: "We're watching." I set the paper down, my pulse steady. "Kendra," I said, my voice calm, "call our lawyer. Tell him I want a full review of every property's compliance records. And get me a meeting with the city inspector. We're not going to let this sit." She nodded, her eyes wide. "Of course." I leaned back, staring at the paper, the words staring back at me like a dare. This was their move. This was how they thought they'd beat me. By making me doubt my own foundation, by making others doubt me. But they didn't know I'd been building this for years, brick by brick, file by file. I'd learned the hard way that trust is earned in details. That night, I drove past one of the buildings they'd targeted, a red brick complex I'd bought and restored myself. The windows glowed with life, families eating dinner, kids' laughter floating out from cracked windows. I pulled into the lot, stepped out, and let the night air wash over me. I walked the perimeter, checking the lights, the locks, the pathways. I stopped to chat with Mrs. Alvarez in 102, who'd been living there since before I'd bought the place. She beamed when she saw me. "Mr. Rhodes, everything's good here. I saw someone snooping around earlier, though. Didn't recognize him. Thanks for letting me know," I said, my smile genuine. "If you see anything else, you call me right away." I made my way back to the truck, the night settling heavy on my shoulders. They thought I'd fold under pressure, thought I'd bend because they'd made me feel small once. But they'd forgotten something. I'd built my life on proving people wrong. Alina thought I'd fold. Her father thought I'd beg. They all thought I'd be the man outside their world forever. But what they didn't know was that I'd spent years preparing for storms like this. I'd built every foundation to withstand the worst they could throw at me. I climbed into the truck and turned the key, the engine roaring to life. The headlights illuminated the street ahead. Straight and long, no shadows deep enough to hide me. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I'd faced worse than them, and I'd walked through every fire they'd set for me. I pulled out of the lot, the city rising up around me like a fortress I'd built with my own hands. Let them come. Let them try to tear me down. I'd be ready, because I wasn't the man who used the back door anymore. I was the man who owned the front. The ad hit the Vermont Business Times on a crisp Tuesday morning. A full-page spread, black and white, no fancy design, just the truth, laid out in bold letters that couldn't be ignored. When family turns into a liability, the cost of trying to destroy your son-in-law. Underneath the headline, I let the evidence speak for itself, screenshots of the fake reviews, emails from anonymous accounts tracing back to a small PR firm known for smear campaigns, the calls to the housing board logged and timestamped. Every thread of the web they tried to weave, laid bare for anyone with eyes to see. I didn't name names, but I didn't have to. Everyone in that town knew who had tried to bring me down, and the evidence made it all but official. The calls started before noon. Tenants, business partners, old colleagues. My phone buzzed like an angry wasp's nest. Most were calls of support, but a few were from reporters eager to sniff out the rest of the story. Terrence called me around lunch. His voice was low, but the respect in it was unmistakable. "You've got some stones," he said. I'd have paid to see the look on Marcel's face when he saw that paper. "And you did it without even dropping his name. That's class." I thanked him, feeling the tight coil in my chest loosen just a bit. "I'm tired of pretending," I said. "They tried to bury me, but I kept the receipts." Word spread fast. My tenants, who'd seen the sudden surge of suspicious inspectors and anonymous calls, rallied behind me. They sent letters of support, notes of gratitude for the repairs I'd made, the upgrades I'd funded, the patience I'd shown. My partners called with messages that mixed disbelief with admiration. In the space of a day, the narrative shifted. Marcel's name, once whispered like a golden ticket, suddenly felt tarnished. People who'd sat at his table, who'd praised his charm, now glanced at him with suspicion. The truth had a way of sticking like tar to your shoes, no matter how carefully you walked. Alina called that night. Her voice was soft, hesitant, the confidence I'd once found attractive now stripped raw. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. "I thought Dad was just protecting the family." "Protecting the family," I repeated, the bitterness coating my tongue. "By destroying me?" "I didn't know," she whispered. "We can fix this." I leaned back in my chair, letting the darkness of the room wrap around me like armor. "Fix what? Me? Or the story you told everyone about me?" She fell silent, and for a moment I could hear her breathing, shallow, uneven. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I didn't know. I thought about the dinners, the laughter in the dining room that never included me, the subtle ways they'd made me feel like an intruder in my own marriage. The times she'd let their jokes slide, never standing up for me, never asking why I was always the one expected to smile and take it. "You didn't want to know," I said. "That's the difference." Silence stretched between us until it frayed at the edges. I didn't hang up. I let the silence speak for me, let her sit in the truth she'd avoided for so long. In the days that followed, the fallout came fast and hard. The city council put a quiet pause on one of Marcel's biggest projects. No explanation given, but the whispers said everything. Investors pulled out of another development, citing reputational risk. His phone calls, once a ticket to influence, now rang unanswered. Me? I kept working. I met with my tenants, answered their questions, reassured them that their homes, and my company, were safe. I shook hands with city inspectors, handed over every document they asked for, and watched them nod, impressed by my meticulous records. Because that was the thing they'd never understood about me. I'd built this empire brick by brick, detail by detail, never taking a shortcut I couldn't defend. They thought they could scare me with whispers. They thought I'd run. But the truth was, I'd been waiting for them to come for me. I'd been waiting to show them what happened when you tried to cut down a man who'd spent his life learning how to stand tall. Their empire cracked fast, like a dam finally giving way under pressure it never believed would come. The calls started at dawn, the ones they'd never thought they'd have to answer. Lawyers, investors, developers suddenly worried about the shine on Marcel's name. I didn't have to say a word. The evidence I'd laid out in the business times did the talking for me. One by one, the permits tied to his latest pet project downtown got pulled. The city council, all hush-hush, sent him polite but devastating notices. "We regret to inform you that your permit is under review." I knew the language well. I'd written it myself once, in a different context. Words that sound neutral but might as well have been a noose. Terrence called me from his car, the roar of wind on the speaker. "Marcel's getting burned alive out there," he said, the disbelief mingled with satisfaction. "Half the council's already talking about severing ties. The rest? They're scared. Nobody wants to be the next name on your list." I leaned back in my chair, the sun streaming through the window, warm against my arms. "Good," I said. "He thought he could take me down with half-truths and threats. He didn't think I'd be ready. He's not the only one who underestimated you." Terrence added, his tone heavy. You're making a lot of people rethink how they do business. Keep that in mind. I ended the call and sat for a moment, listening to the hum of the city outside. The street below was alive with people going about their day, oblivious to the silent war that had raged behind closed doors. I felt the weight of it all, years of biting my tongue, of letting them treat me like the guy who didn't belong at the table. That night, I was reading emails in my apartment when there was a knock on the door. It wasn't polite or cautious. It was desperate. 3 short raps that told me everything I needed to know. I got up, the floor cool under my bare feet, and opened the door. Alina stood there, tears on her cheeks, mascara smudged like war paint. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. I didn't move. "What do you want, Alina?" She wiped her eyes and glanced around the hallway like a woman hunted. "I didn't know it would go this far," she whispered. "Dad, he's a mess. Mom won't talk to anyone. The permits, the investors. Everything's falling apart. We didn't know you'd do this." "Do what?" I asked, folding my arms across my chest. "Defend myself? Tell the truth." Her lip trembled. "We didn't think you'd turn on us." The words landed like a slap. "Turn on you?" I echoed, a laugh building in my throat. "You all turned on me years ago. Every time they called me blue-collar lucky. Every time they invited me in through the back door. Every time they laughed at me in the kitchen while they toasted themselves in the dining room. I was never one of you. You made sure of that." She shook her head, tears dripping onto her blouse. "I didn't know." "No," I interrupted, my voice calm but sharp enough to slice through any lie she'd rehearsed. "You didn't want to know. That's the difference." She stared at me like she'd just realized she didn't know who I was. Maybe she never had. "I thought we could fix this. We could try again. Be us." I let out a breath, the last of my anger dissolving into something quieter, colder. "Fix what? Me? Or the story you told everyone about me?" I shook my head. "I don't need fixing, Alina. I never did. I needed you to stand beside me. You couldn't." Her eyes shone in the dim light of the hallway. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I really am. I believe that. But sorry doesn't heal a broken bone. It just points at the fracture and says, that shouldn't have happened." She took a step closer, her hand outstretched. "Please. Let's talk. Just you and me." I stepped back. "No," her hand dropped. "So that's it." "That's it," I said, my voice steady. "You don't get to rewrite the story now. You chose your side. You let them decide who I was. Now you can live with it." She stood there for a moment, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Then she turned and walked away, her steps echoing down the hallway like a farewell. When the door clicked shut behind me, I exhaled and let the silence fill the room. I felt lighter, like a weight I'd carried for too long had finally lifted. The next day, Terrence called again. "Heard Marcel's investors are threatening lawsuits," he said, the smile in his voice unmistakable. "He's scrambling. I'd say the king's castle is crumbling." I leaned back, the chair creaking. "Good," I said. "Let him feel what he put me through." Because this was never just about one dinner or one insult. This was about every time they made me feel small, every time they thought they could keep me in the kitchen while they raised their glasses in the dining room. It was my turn now, and I wasn't going to let them forget it. I sat at the lawyer's office, the windows tinted to block out the midday glare. Papers spread across the mahogany desk, each page a record of promises broken, of trust eroded by laughter that had always been at my expense. My lawyer, a woman named Evelyn with sharp eyes and a voice that never trembled, slid the final draft across to me. "It's straightforward," she said. "No shared assets. No alimony. No claims on your properties. Clean break." I let the words sink in. Clean break. It sounded antiseptic, like a surgical wound that wouldn't bleed. I picked up the pen and hovered over the line that said, signature. For a moment, I saw Alina's face, the way her eyes used to light up at the smallest kindness, the way she'd held my hand at the courthouse the day we'd signed the marriage certificate. I'd thought then that marriage was a partnership, a safe place where honesty lived. But that was before I learned that some families treat trust like a trick, a way to let you get close enough to twist the knife. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. It felt final, like the last chapter of a book I'd outgrown. Evelyn nodded, her lips tight but approving. "That's it," she said. "She'll be served by end of day." I leaned back, the leather of the chair creaking under my weight. My mind wandered to that Thanksgiving dinner, to the way Alina's father had offered me a seat at his table with one hand and tried to cut my legs out from under me with the other. The way Alina had watched it happen and said nothing. Every polite laugh, every look of pity, like I was the poor man lucky to have married their daughter, as if love was some lottery ticket they'd given me out of charity. But the thing was, I'd never been the lucky one. I'd been the one who made his own luck, who turned every insult into fuel. And now, as Evelyn gathered the papers into a neat stack, I felt that same fire, quiet but unstoppable. Alina had texted me earlier. "We can talk about this. We can work it out." But I knew what that meant. Work it out was another way of saying pretend it never happened. Another way of pulling me back into the shadows while they laughed in the light. I stood and slid my jacket over my shoulders. Evelyn handed me a slim manila envelope. "This is a copy for your records," she said. "I'll have a courier deliver the official documents to her." I nodded. "Thanks." She hesitated, her eyes softening. "If you need anything, eh?" "I've got it," I said, cutting her off gently. I didn't need sympathy. I didn't need anyone to tell me I'd done the right thing. I knew it. The sky outside was a bruised gray, the clouds thick with rain that hadn't yet fallen. I walked down the sidewalk, every step feeling deliberate, as if I were crossing a bridge to a place I'd longed for without even knowing it. My phone buzzed again. Alina. I let it ring. At home, I poured myself a glass of that same aged scotch I'd brought to Thanksgiving, the bottle now half empty. I set it on the counter, its amber glow catching the light like a small sun. The memory of that night was still fresh, the way I'd stood in the kitchen while they laughed in the dining room, the way her mother had called me Frank, like I was a caterer. That scotch had been a peace offering then. Now it was a victory toast. I lifted the glass to my lips and let the warmth slide down my throat. The bitterness wasn't just the liquor, it was the history, the quiet acceptance of every slight I'd endured. I'd spent years letting them tell me who I was supposed to be. Now, with every sip, I reclaimed a piece of myself. The divorce clause was simple: no alimony, no spousal claims, no settlement. Every asset I'd built remained mine. Every building, every tenant, every contract, they were mine because I'd earned them. She could keep her name, her parties, her dinners under the chandelier. I'd keep my empire. The phone rang again, persistent. I let it ring. I'd learned that sometimes silence was the only answer that mattered. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out in front of me. The lines blurred slightly, a combination of the scotch and the weight of it all. I thought about the man I'd been when I married her. A man who believed that family was about showing up for each other. That if you worked hard enough, you'd earn their respect. That if you loved someone enough, they'd stand by you when the world turned cold. But the truth was, respect couldn't be earned from people who'd already decided you weren't enough. And love, real love, didn't ask you to shrink so someone else could stand taller. I picked up the pen again and signed the final page. It felt like an exorcism. The man I'd been. The man who'd let them define him, died with that signature. I boxed up the wedding photos, the anniversary cards, the souvenirs of a marriage that had been more performance than partnership. I set the box by the door. Maybe I'd donate it. Maybe I'd let it gather dust in the back of the closet. Either way, I'd moved on. The next morning, Evelyn called to confirm the papers had been delivered. She didn't contest it, she said. Just signed. I closed my eyes, letting the relief flood in. Good, I whispered, because I was done fighting for a place at their table. I'd built my own table, stronger, wider, with a seat for anyone who treated me like I belonged. I raised the glass of scotch one more time, the amber liquid reflecting the early morning light. I thought about the man who'd walked into that Thanksgiving dinner, his bottle of scotch in hand, thinking he was bringing a gift to a family who'd always considered him the help. But I wasn't the help. I was the man who owned the house they lived in, the man who'd signed every deed, every check, every promise. And as I took that last sip, I realized something. They'd given me exactly what I needed, proof that I didn't belong in their world, and the strength to build my own. 1 year later, I stood at the threshold of a building I'd transformed from a crumbling shell into a place that breathed with life. It was Thanksgiving again, but this time the gathering wasn't held in someone else's home, it was in mine. A community center that doubled as affordable housing, a place where families who had never been offered a seat at the table could finally gather without fear of being turned away. The foyer smelled of warm bread and spiced cider, the air alive with laughter and the shuffle of children's shoes on freshly waxed floors. My team had decorated the place with autumn leaves, paper turkeys made by local kids, and a simple banner that read, "Welcome home." And that's exactly what it was, a home, even if it wasn't a house. Terrence showed up first, his wife on his arm, both of them carrying a pie that smelled of bourbon and caramel. He gave me that familiar grin as he extended the box. "This place looks incredible," he said, his eyes sweeping the high ceilings and exposed brick walls. "You did this." I shook his hand firmly. "No," I said, gesturing toward the families filing in behind him. "We did this." A young mother approached, her little girl clinging to her skirt. "Thank you for inviting us," she said shyly. "It means a lot." I smiled, bending to the girl's level. "I'm glad you're here," I said, meaning every word. As the room filled, I saw faces that reminded me why I'd built this place. A man who'd just gotten off a double shift at the warehouse. A woman who'd finally left a bad marriage. Kids with eyes wide open, ready for a new start. They didn't know the full story of how I'd gotten here, but they felt the warmth, the welcome, and that was enough. I watched the door as people arrived, some familiar, some new, but this time, I stood at the front. I didn't need to sneak around the side or be ushered through a service entrance. I owned the building, and I owned every brick in the foundation. The weight of that truth settled on me like armor. No Alina. No Marcel. No Cynthia. Their seats were empty, their invitations never sent. This was a table for people who respected each other, who knew that family was something you built, not something you demanded. I thought about the man I'd been last year, the one who'd walked through the kitchen door, shoulders heavy with the burden of trying to prove himself to people who'd never cared. That man was gone. In his place stood someone who'd learned the hardest lesson. You can't force people to see your worth. You can only build it, brick by brick, until it stands so tall they can't ignore it. Terrence raised a glass of cider. "To second chances," he said, his voice carrying across the room. And to the man who gave us all a seat at his table. The room erupted in cheers, the sound swelling like a wave that carried every heart with it. I felt something shift inside me. An old pain loosening its grip, a final sigh of relief. I raised my own glass, the cider crisp and cool in my hand. "To us," I said. "To every one of us who decided that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you choose." I looked around the room, at every face illuminated by the warm glow of hanging lights, and I felt a pride that had nothing to do with money or status. This was the empire I'd built. Not a tower of glass and steel, but a place where laughter echoed down hallways that once stood empty, where every door opened to possibility. And this time, I walked everyone in through the front door, including myself, because the only door I entered now was one I owned. My name's Grant Ellison, and up until a few days ago, I thought I had a solid marriage. Not some fairy tale romance, but a quiet, dependable, grown-up kind of love. 8 years with the same woman, learning her routines, putting up with her quirks, saying sorry even when I wasn't wrong just to keep the peace. I used to think that made me a good husband, a mature man, a safe harbor. Apparently, I was just a well-fed mutt. It was last Friday when things started to unravel, though truthfully, it had probably been unraveling for years. I just didn't hear the thread snap until we were deep into that drive. Skylar had asked me to take her and her friends, Laura, Haley, and Ruth, to some spa weekend in the hills, about 5 hours away. I remember blinking at her when she asked, surprised, because I'd already made plans to go fishing with Hugo. But she smiled that tight, rehearsed smile she always wore when she needed a favor, and said, "You're so good at long drives. And we need the SUV, you know none of us want to cram into Ruth's Prius." And just like that, I said yes. I packed their bags in the trunk. I filled the gas tank. I even cleaned the dashboard and stocked the center console with snacks and gum. Skylar didn't say thank you. Just slid into the back seat, not even the passenger's side, and started chatting with her friends like I was the Uber driver. No one offered me coffee. No one asked how I was. The first hour passed in relative silence for me, except for their occasional requests: turn the heat down, switch the playlist, take this exit instead. I kept my hands on the wheel and nodded. I didn't mind. I was used to fading into the background when Skylar was with her friends. They were the kind of women who wore coordinated brunch outfits and had matching Instagram captions for their girls' getaways. I didn't belong in their world. I never had. But around hour 3, somewhere near the foothills, it happened. The moment that cracked whatever illusion of normal I had left. Skylar was laughing about something Laura had said, and then I heard her voice cut through the cabin like a blade. "Honestly," she said, "he's like a rescue dog. You feed him, he wags his tail. So easy to control." Then the laughter followed. Not polite chuckles. Not confused reactions. They laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. I didn't say anything. I didn't flinch. I just tightened my grip on the steering wheel and kept my eyes on the road. But inside, something twisted. Something sharp. I felt it spread down my arms and settle in my stomach. They went quiet for a second after that, maybe realizing I'd heard. Maybe not caring. Haley cleared her throat. Laura tapped at her phone. Skylar changed the topic like she hadn't just compared me to a mutt she picked up off the street. I spent the next 2 hours pretending I was somewhere else, mentally sorting bolts in a toolbox, remembering the sound of the lake at dawn, replaying the joke over and over in my head. Rescue dog. That's what I was to her. When we finally arrived at the spa resort, the women got out laughing again, breezy, carefree. I popped the trunk, grabbed their bags, and stacked them neatly by the valet stand. Skylar barely looked at me. She adjusted her sunglasses and said over her shoulder, "Don't forget to wash the sheets before I get back. They stink like you." No thank you. No kiss goodbye. Just that. And with that, she was gone. The glass doors swallowed her up, and I was left standing there, alone, holding nothing. I got back in the car and sat in the driver's seat for a full 5 minutes before starting the engine. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't call Hugo, even though I wanted to. I just stared out the windshield at nothing, feeling smaller than I'd felt in years. The drive back was different, quieter. I didn't turn on music, didn't check my phone, just let the road roll out in front of me and let that sentence echo in my head like a song on repeat. You feed him, he wags his tail. I used to think Skylar and I were just coasting, like a lot of married couples after the honeymoon phase wears off. You work, you pay bills, you smile through dinners with in-laws and plan for weekends that never quite happen. I told myself we were just busy, stressed, that maybe one day we'd find our rhythm again. But what if there was no rhythm to find? What if the love I thought we had was just obedience? What if I was never her partner, just her convenience? I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between the 3rd and 4th hour of that drive home, I realized something. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt humiliated. And that was worse. When I walked back into our house, everything looked different. The hallway photos, mostly of her. The furniture, stuff she picked out. Even the color of the walls. I'd wanted a soft olive green in the living room, but we got charcoal because she said olive looked cheap. I agreed, because I always did. I stood in our kitchen, staring at the fridge covered in her workout schedule and meal plans. Not a single magnet from my childhood fridge. No photo of my parents. No evidence of my life before her. I was 36. I had a mortgage, a degree in architecture, and a decent credit score. But standing in that house, I felt like a guest. A temporary visitor in the life of a woman who saw me as a trained dog she could show off to friends. I made a sandwich. Not because I was hungry, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I stood there chewing in silence, staring at the floor tiles I installed myself last summer while Skylar went wine tasting with Rachel. She didn't even notice when she came back. And then, like a final twist of the knife, I opened her laptop to check for a delivery confirmation. She'd asked me to return a faulty steamer. Her email was open. Her social media was still logged in. I didn't mean to look, but something told me to click. That's when I saw it. The private group chats, the messages, the memes, and everything I thought I knew started to fall apart. But that's a story for another chapter. All I can say is that drive didn't just take Skylar to a spa resort. It took me somewhere else entirely, out of my denial, and straight into the truth. The moment the front door shut behind me, it felt like something inside me stayed outside. Something I couldn't quite name, but I felt the absence of it immediately, like when you lose your keys but don't realize it until you're already late. I dropped the house keys in the bowl by the door and just stood there. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, full of unspoken things. I could still hear her laugh in my head, echoing off the highway, as if it had attached itself to the lining of my brain. I took off my shoes in the hallway like I always did. Habit. 8 years of it. My back ached from the drive, my throat dry from not saying a single word for nearly 5 hours. I passed the photo wall on my way to the kitchen, our wedding day, her graduation from grad school, a staged Christmas card from 2 years ago where I was photoshopped thinner because she thought it looked cleaner. Not a single candid photo. Not one moment where I looked genuinely happy. I flicked on the kitchen light. The bulbs were still half dim because Skylar liked the warm tone better. The island counter was covered with her supplements, her expensive matcha tins, her monogrammed glass bottle filled with lemon slices and cucumber. I reached for a bottle of water. Lukewarm. and suddenly the silence started to grate. I grabbed the remote, hit power on the TV in the living room just for some noise. But I didn't sit. I walked around instead, pacing like a man who'd just woken up in someone else's home. The couch? She picked it. The shelves? Filled with her books. The rugs? Persian. Well, faux Persian, but expensive. She'd called my recliner an eyesore, so I gave it to Hugo a year ago and never bought another. That's when the realization started sinking in. This wasn't my home. It was hers. And I was just background. Support staff. The driver. The guy who installed things, paid things, fixed things, but never owned anything that mattered. I walked to the bedroom. Our bed was made, by me, as usual. Her side still had the lavender spray she used every night. My side was bare. No photos. No trinkets. Just my phone charger and an old book she once told me was too depressing. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the kind of tired that sleep wouldn't fix. It wasn't just about what she said in the car. That sentence, he's like a rescue dog, sure, it hit deep. But it was more than that. It was everything I'd ignored up until now. The small jabs. The dismissive glances. The way her friends looked at me when I'd serve them drinks at the house like I was the hired help. I used to laugh it off. Tell myself she was just joking. That she was tired. That she didn't mean it like that. But the truth? That wasn't love. That was convenience dressed up as commitment. And I was too blind, or maybe too scared, to call it out. After a long shower, I threw on some sweatpants and walked back to the kitchen. I opened the fridge. Not a single thing I liked in there. Everything was low sodium, dairy-free, gluten-free, organic. I made a plain peanut butter sandwich and ate it standing up, still staring at the same tile floor I'd laid down with my own two hands. She told me I was so good with my hands back then. Funny how praise always came when she needed something. I wandered into her office to put a package on her desk. Another one of her self-care kits had arrived. Lavender oil, herbal tea, some crystal-infused candle. She'd once told me I was too plain for spiritual stuff. I'd laughed at the time. Now it just sounded cruel. That's when I noticed her laptop. It was open, still on sleep mode. She must have left it that way while ordering things last night. I didn't plan to snoop. I'm not the jealous type. I never even set passwords on my phone. But something drew me in. Some ache in my gut that whispered, look. I moved the mouse. Her Facebook was open. And it wasn't the main feed that caught my eye. It was a private message tab. I didn't click it at first. I stared at the names. All familiar. Her spa friends. Her sister Rachel. A few from work. Then my eyes landed on a message thread labeled Rescue Squad Dog Face with ears of joy. I clicked. It was a group chat. Skylar, Laura, Haley, and Ruth. Dozens of messages. Screenshots. Jokes. None of it was private, just 4 women roasting their husbands like it was their part-time job. Skylar, he actually asked if I needed help packing. So obedient. I should give him a treat. Haley, you should teach a class, girl. Ruth, how to domesticate your man in 30 days or less. Laura, step 1, deny him affection. Step 2, watch him do dishes just to get a smile. I scrolled, hands trembling. My face was hot. My ears burned. There was a screenshot of a text I'd sent Skylar 2 weeks ago. Me. Hey, want me to pick up Ty tonight? I know you had a rough day. She captioned it. Such a good boy. Rolls over on command. The next few screenshots were of me around the house. Fixing the garbage disposal. Trimming the hedge. Folding laundry. One of them had audio. I clicked. It was my voice, humming as I repaired the bathroom sink. Skylar whispered over it. Listen to him. In his little husband habitat. He thinks this is love. Then came the laughter. Hers. Laura's. I couldn't even hear the wrench drop. I only heard my dignity splinter in real time. I sat back in the chair. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't change. I just stared at the screen, feeling something dark settle into my chest. Not rage. Not yet. Clarity. I closed the laptop gently, like it was a coffin. That was the moment. The turning point. The line between the man I was and the man I had to become. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, making mental checklists. Things to protect. Things to move. Things to cancel. People to trust. Skylar had taken 8 years to slowly erase my voice in this marriage. Now, I was going to find it again. Not by shouting. Not by begging. But by quietly walking away from the leash. Because I finally understood something. I'm not a rescue dog. I'm a man who's finally done being trained. I never used to be a suspicious man. I didn't check phones. Didn't second-guess my partner's words. I believed in giving trust freely because I thought that's what marriage was built on. But after reading through that group chat, watching those cruel jokes made at my expense like I was a performing clown in some private circus, I knew I had to see it all. It's strange how quickly you become someone else when you're wounded enough. The man I used to be would have walked away, maybe cried in the garage and blamed himself. But the man I became in that moment wanted answers. Not revenge. Not even confrontation. Just truth. Cold, full truth, with all the filters stripped off. That Saturday morning, I poured a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and sat at the kitchen table with Skylar's laptop. She'd left it behind in her rush to get to the spa, assuming as always that I'd just make myself useful until her return. It was still logged into her email, browser, calendar, and cloud drive. No password prompts. Almost too easy. It started with her emails. Hundreds of them. Most mundane product confirmations, shipping notices, fitness newsletters. But then I noticed a folder labeled Wellness Projects. That alone wouldn't have raised an eyebrow, except I remembered her using that term once when I asked her where $900 went from our joint account. Wellness Projects, she'd said dismissively. You wouldn't get it. I opened the folder. Invoices. Multiple. One for a private therapist who wasn't on our insurance plan. Another for some online relationship coaching course. Not for couples. For her alone. The tagline made my jaw tighten. Learn to reclaim your power and reshape your partner without saying a word. There were also PDF notes from the coaching program. I skimmed them. One line stood out in bold. Reward only when behavior aligns with your expectations. Otherwise, create distance. Eventually, they'll adjust. It was like reading a manual on how to train a pet. I backed out of the folder, stomach churning. I opened her cloud gallery next. At first, it was just selfies, gym poses, smoothie bowls, perfectly staged shots of her looking thoughtful in cafes. Then came the videos. One of them was me. I was crouched under the sink, wearing old jeans and a faded t-shirt, fixing the pipe that kept dripping every other week. The angle made it clear she'd set her phone against the wall without my knowledge. I was humming to myself. Skylar's voice whispered in the background. Every time I act cold, he does a chore. Pavlov's husband. A giggle from someone else, probably Laura. The screen went black. I closed the gallery, tuned him to keep watching. I checked the calendar next, not even sure what I was looking for. That's when I noticed recurring events labeled RC meeting every other Thursday night. RC. Russ Carmichael. Her boss. The same man she claimed was too old to flirt and just her mentor. A married executive with a history of turnover in his department and rumors swirling about unprofessional conduct. I'd heard whispers, but Skylar always brushed it off like office gossip. She'd laugh and say, Russ? Please. He barely knows my last name. Funny, then, that she had at least 22 calendar entries involving him. Not meetings. Not team events. Just RC meeting. I felt heat creeping up my neck, but I wasn't ready to assume anything. Not yet. So I opened her message app. The first thread that jumped out wasn't Russ. It was the same group chat I'd seen before. I skipped over it. There was only so much mockery I could take in a single morning. But then, I saw a name I didn't recognize, Heather M. I clicked. It wasn't Heather. It was Skylar's dummy account. They were sending messages to themselves, clearly storing things secretly. Screenshots. Notes. Thoughts she didn't want others to see. I scrolled, and my heart sank. There were chat logs with Laura about timing things right. One message from Skylar read, Russ said once I'm free, he'll make it official. Promotion first, then paperwork. Laura had replied, just don't let Grant catch on too soon. He'll probably cry and ruin your narrative. Skylar's response, oh please. He'll fold like always. That man still apologizes when I roll my eyes. That's when I shut the laptop. I sat in silence for what felt like hours. My coffee had gone cold. My hands felt foreign to me, like they didn't know what to do anymore. I wasn't just being mocked. I was being used, trained, conditioned. She was slowly phasing me out of her life, already making space for someone else while I sat around believing we were just going through a rough patch. And the worst part? I'd allowed it. I made excuses for it. For years, I thought her coldness was stress. Her absence was ambition. Her constant criticisms were tough love. But it wasn't love. It was manipulation wrapped in charm. A project she took on, got bored with, and was ready to abandon once the next opportunity came with a company bonus. I called Hugo that afternoon. He picked up on the second ring. "Yo, you good? Thought you were at the lake," he said. "I didn't go," I replied. My voice didn't even sound like mine. "You sound weird. You all right?" "No," I said quietly. "Not really." I told him everything. Not the way I'm telling it now. Not so clean, not so composed. I stuttered through some parts. I paused a lot. There were long silences where I didn't know how to explain what I'd just seen. Hugo didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a beat of silence before he spoke. "All right," he said. "What's the plan?" That question hit me harder than I expected. What's the plan? For the first time in years, someone wasn't asking me to stay quiet, keep peace, or try harder. He was asking how I wanted to take control. I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to confront Skylar right away. That's what she'd expect. I wasn't going to blow up and give her a victim card to wave in front of her friends. No. I was going to do something she wouldn't see coming. Take back control, quietly, deliberately, and on my own terms. I ended the call and grabbed a notepad. Made a list. Hugo agreed to help with the steps. Finances. Locks. My own space. Emotional distance. Everything I'd ignored, everything I let slide, I was going to fix it. Not to win her back. Not to punish her. But to finally stop being the background character in my own damn life. She trained me, huh? Well, it's time I untrained myself. It's strange how calm I felt when I started making the list. Not angry. Not bitter. Just focused. The kind of focus you get when you finally stopped lying to yourself. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was rebuilding. Not for her. Not to prove anything. Just to protect what little I had left of myself. First thing I did was open a new bank account. Not a joint one. Not a shared savings. Just mine. I walked into the local branch that Monday morning and asked to speak to someone in private. The banker, young guy, maybe mid-20s, smiled politely until I explained I was closing a joint account I'd shared with my wife of 8 years. I watched his face shift the moment I mentioned that. Sympathy, maybe. Or recognition. Like he'd seen this movie before. He didn't ask questions. Just nodded and handed me the paperwork. I transferred half of what was left in the joint account into my new one. I didn't take it all. I wasn't trying to start a war. But I wasn't going to leave myself exposed anymore. I also canceled the Wellness Box subscription she'd been charging to my card. $300 a month for powders and stones and jars of air-scented self-importance. After that, I called the storage unit place on Maple Street. Booked one under my name. Climate-controlled. Enough space to fit everything she'd left behind when she went to the spa. I wasn't going to throw anything out, not yet. But I wasn't going to let her come back and act like nothing had changed either. Then I changed the locks. I'd done it before, once when we got the place, once when Skylar lost her purse. So I knew how. I went down to the hardware store, picked out a better deadbolt, and installed it myself that night. Hugo offered to help, but I needed to do it alone. One last quiet act of reclaiming the door to my own home. I left her keys on the kitchen table, and then I packed her things. Not all of it. Just what was clearly hers. Clothes. Shoes. Her gym equipment. Makeup. The drawer of beauty products she guarded like a vault. Her laptop. Her vision board. The little frame quote that used to hang in her office that said, "Train your man or he'll become someone else's headache." Yeah, that one went in the box first. I labeled everything neatly, sealed it up, and loaded it into the truck. Drove it to the unit. Sent the address and entry code to her sister Rachel with a simple message. "Skylar's things are here. Lease is under my name. She has 30 days to retrieve them." Rachel didn't reply, but the message was marked as read. Then came the hardest part, telling people. I started small, Hugo already knew, and he offered to take me out for dinner that night. I declined. I needed space. I needed to feel what I was doing, not distract myself from it. The next day, I called my mother. Now, my mom is the kind of woman who believes in forgiveness above all else. Grew up in the church. Thinks therapy is a gift from God. But she's also sharp. I knew she'd want to hear the full story, so I told her everything. The rescue dog comment. The group chat. The recordings. The manipulation. The money. Russ. She went quiet. That same heavy silence I felt in my own chest. Then she said, "Are you sure there's no saving this?" And I told her the truth. There's nothing left to save. She cried a little. Said she'd pray for both of us. Asked me not to close my heart completely. I told her I wouldn't. But I wasn't going to give it to someone who used it like a leash again. The rest came quickly. I called the utilities, had them switched over, canceled the cleaning service Skylar used that charged me double for emergency dusting. I called the lawn guy and told him to invoice me directly now. And then, when everything practical was done, I sat down and wrote the hardest email I've ever written. Subject line: the truth about Skylar and me. I didn't post it publicly, didn't make a scene. I sent it to a small list of people who'd been part of our lives. Mutual friends, her family, a few of my coworkers who'd seen her parade me around at office parties like some obedient accessory. I attached screenshots, a few audio files. I didn't add commentary. I just let them see for themselves. I ended the message with one line: please don't contact me to tell me I should work it out. You weren't the one being trained. And then I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, not relief, but something still, quiet. Like standing in a burned-down house and realizing you survived the fire. The messages came the next day. I didn't check them all, but a few slipped through. Laura messaged me. I'm sorry. I didn't know she took it that far. I was wrong to laugh. You didn't deserve that. Haley messaged too. Shorter. I didn't mean it personally. Whatever that meant. Ruth? She didn't say a word. Probably too proud. But Skylar, she was the storm. She called, texted, emailed, left voicemails. What the hell are you doing? Grant, this isn't funny. You changed the locks? You're being insane, call me. And then the guilt started. Can we talk? Please don't do this. You're blowing everything out of proportion. But I didn't reply. Because there was no proportion to blow up. She made me into a joke, and then laughed when I played along. Now she could sit with the silence. I wasn't angry anymore. That would have taken too much energy. I was done giving her power over my emotions. I didn't want to scream, didn't want to confront, didn't want closure wrapped in her crocodile tears. I wanted peace. And I was finally starting to feel it. I looked around the house that night. It still looked like hers. But something had changed. It was quieter now. Warmer somehow. Like the house itself had exhaled. I made a simple dinner, eggs and toast. Washed the dishes. Lit a candle. One of the few things in the house that I'd actually picked out. It smelled like cedar wood and clean air. Masculine. Honest. Then I sat on the couch, turned on some Miles Davis, and watched the sun go down. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like anyone's project. I felt like a man finally locking the world out and letting himself back in. The doorbell rang at 3:42 p.m. on Monday. It wasn't a polite ring. It was frantic. The kind of ringing someone does when they think if they press hard enough, the door might forget it's locked. I didn't move at first. I was in the living room, legs up on the coffee table, watching a rerun of a show I didn't care about. A cup of tea in my hand, not because I like tea, but because Skylar hated the smell of it, and suddenly, that was reason enough for me to start drinking it. The ringing continued. A pause. Then pounding. I didn't have to check the peephole. I knew who it was. Skylar always had this pattern. Silence, then guilt, then pressure, then theatrics. I used to cave somewhere between guilt and pressure. This time, I let the storm hit the door. Grant, she shouted. Grant, open the damn door. I muted the TV, took another sip of tea. Then I stood and walked quietly to the window by the hallway, peeking through the edge of the curtain. She looked exactly like I imagined she would, disheveled but pretending she wasn't. Designer coat over leggings. Messy bun, no makeup, oversized sunglasses like she was hiding from paparazzi. Her phone in one hand, keys in the other, waving both like weapons. I leaned against the wall and listened. You're seriously doing this, she yelled. You're making a scene. Do you want the neighbors to hear? Funny how that was her concern now. The same woman who'd laughed with her friends about training me was suddenly worried about decorum. I didn't speak. Didn't open the door. Just watched her, detached. Like watching an actress fumble through the wrong script. She tried calling next. I heard the phone buzz from the kitchen. 14 missed calls by then. The voicemails started piling up, some tearful, some furious, all carefully balanced between, this is your fault, and, I love you. Please stop this. I didn't listen to any of them. Eventually, the noise stopped. She stood there for a long time, pacing, looking at the door like she could will it to open. Then, after almost 20 minutes, she pulled out her phone and walked back to her car. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I was in a meeting at the office when my assistant poked her head in. There's a woman here asking for you, she whispered awkwardly. She says it's important. I knew before I asked. Did she give a name? She nodded. Skylar. I told her you were in a meeting. She's in the lobby. I took a deep breath, stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked out like I was heading to battle. She was there, in the middle of the lobby, eyes wide and glossy like a soap opera heroine. She didn't even wait for me to speak. Why are you doing this to me? She asked, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. You changed the locks, ignored my messages, sent my things to a storage unit like I'm some stranger. I nodded slowly. Because you've been acting like I'm a stranger for years. Her face twisted, caught somewhere between shock and indignation. Don't do that. Don't flip this on me. I folded my arms. No flipping. Just facts. She looked around, clearly aware of the receptionist pretending not to watch. Can we talk? In private? No, I said. Everything that needed to be said was already said. In your group chats. In your videos. In your wellness project notes. That froze her. You went through my things, she hissed. After I drove you, and your friends across the state, listened to you call me a rescue dog, and got told to wash sheets because they smelled like me? Yeah, I did. Her shoulders dropped. For a second, I saw her drop the performance too. Grant. I didn't mean that. It was a stupid joke. No, I said, my voice steady. It was a confession. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I was venting. Everyone does it. No, not everyone turns their spouse into a punchline. Not everyone mocks someone they say they love to feel better about themselves. Her hand went to her chest, clutching at some invisible ache. 8 years. Grant, you're really going to throw it all away? I looked her in the eye, and I said it. I'm not your rescue dog anymore. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I was borrowing someone else's line. But it landed. I saw it hit her like a slap. Her mouth dropped open, then shut again. I turned and walked away, left her standing in the lobby like a statue that forgot its pose. Back in my office, I sat down, took a slow breath, and realized something important. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't fantasizing about getting back at her or making her suffer. I wasn't anything. I was free. That evening, I sat on the porch with Hugo. We drank beer from the bottle and watched the sky turn pink. She showed up at work, he asked. Lobby. Full dramatic effect, I said, nodding. And what did you do? Told her I'm done playing house pet. He laughed. Did she cry? A little. Not sure if it was real. Hugo leaned back in his chair, took a swig, and said, Proud of you, man. Most guys in your position would have gone nuclear. Blown it up. You're doing it like a surgeon. Clean, cold, no blood. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the yard. It was quiet again. My house looked the same, but it felt different. Like it belonged to someone who finally knew what dignity tasted like. And I planned to keep it that way. She begged for one night to talk. I wasn't planning to give her anything. Not a meeting, not a conversation, not even the decency of a shared space. But Hugo convinced me to allow one final sit down. It's not for her, he said. It's for you. Let her look you in the eye and see what she lost. So I agreed. One night, one conversation, one room, no yelling, no bargaining. Just truth laid bare. I prepared like it was trial day. I printed every screenshot. Messages. Group chats. The rescue dog comment. The wellness coaching files. Bank statements from the last 9 months showing consistent withdrawals Skylar made from our joint account under labels like groceries and medical that ended up funding spa packages, designer handbags, and what looked like a hotel in Aspen. I set them out like exhibits on the kitchen island, my courtroom bench. Neat. Precise. Impossible to ignore. Then I opened my laptop and queued up the videos. Not all of them. Just a few key ones. The recordings of her laughing behind my back while I fixed things around the house, comparing me to a pet husband. One video of her FaceTiming Laura while whispering about how she'd trained me to obey her moods. I didn't feel cruel doing it. I felt clean, like I was clearing out rot. She arrived at 6:32 p.m. wearing my favorite dress, the navy blue one with the little sleeves and the lace at the bottom. She used to wear it on our date nights. The first time I told her I loved her, she was wearing that same dress. I'd be lying if I said it didn't punch a hole through my chest to see it again. But this time, it felt like bait. Like a hunter wearing perfume in the woods, hoping the deer walks closer. She stepped inside cautiously, I scanning the house like it might look unfamiliar now. Maybe it did. Maybe she could already feel that this wasn't her stage anymore. Grant, she said, her voice soft, rehearsed. Thank you for letting me. Sit down, I interrupted, gesturing to the stool at the counter. She blinked but followed instructions. I noticed that instinctively how she followed direction when the power shifted. I'd never seen it so clearly before. I stood across from her, arms folded, silent. Her eyes darted to the papers in front of her. She reached for one, an email exchange between her and Ruth where she joked about making me sleep on the couch for forgetting almond milk. You went through my stuff, she said, her tone sharpening. I lived with you, I replied. We shared a bank account, a roof, a bed. You didn't leave me much choice. She flipped through more pages. Her face tightened when she reached the receipts, makeup, gifts, spa treatments, all bought with our joint card. Over $20,000 across 6 months. She looked up, already defensive. That was supposed to be temporary. I was stressed. Work's been. You labeled these as medical expenses. I needed them for my sanity. Then you should have used your own card. She flinched. The confidence cracked a little. I leaned forward and tapped the next stack of printouts, screenshots of her group chat with Laura, Haley, and Ruth. All the jokes. All the mockery. My name reduced to emojis and punchlines. My efforts turned into comedy. She didn't speak. Just sat there, jaw clenched. I want you to read them, I said, out loud. She looked horrified. What? If you're proud of what you said, read it out loud. Right here. Right now. Just to me. No audience. She glanced down at the paper in front of her. I watched her lips twitch. Honestly, he's like a rescue dog. You feed him, he wags his tail. So easy to control. The sentence came out barely above a whisper. You laughed when you wrote that, I said. You laughed in a car full of women I drove across the state. You all laughed. I was venting, she muttered. You don't understand how hard it is being with someone who just gives up their whole personality to please you. I raised my eyebrows. You mean being with someone who listens? Shows up? Fixes what breaks? Buys groceries? Covers rent? She crossed her arms. You made everything about responsibility. You were boring, Grant. Predictable. I felt like I was living with a maintenance man, not a husband. There it was. The real truth. No filter. I didn't even flinch. And yet you had no problem using me for convenience. Don't twist it, she said quickly. I never wanted things to go this far. I just needed space. Russ understood that. Ah, there it was. I tilted my head. Russ, you're not denying it then. She hesitated for half a second. That was all I needed. I saw the calendar, the messages, the RC meetings. You celebrated the spa weekend as your pre-promotion party, didn't you? The one he promised if you dropped the deadweight husband. Her face went pale. Who told you that? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She stood suddenly. So what now? You're going to humiliate me? You're going to tell everyone I cheated and paint yourself as the victim? I'm not painting anything, I said quietly. I just laid out the canvas. You filled it in. I gave you years of my life, she yelled, voice rising now, hands trembling. I kept this house together. I cleaned. I planned. I carried us through every social event where people thought you were too quiet or too awkward to matter. I thought we were a team, I replied, not yelling, not shaking. Turns out I was just part of the furniture. She scoffed. So what? You're going to be some self-righteous monk now? Start over with your pride and a pile of paperwork? Good luck finding someone who'll tolerate your dullness. I reached under the counter and clicked play on the speaker. Her voice filled the room. That recording, her spa car comment. Loud, cruel, echoing. He's like a rescue dog. She stopped speaking. I paused the audio. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was righteous. I'm not dull, I said. I'm dependable. And dependable doesn't mean disposable. Skylar said nothing. Her lips were quivering, but no tears came. Just rage. She wanted control back and didn't know how to get it. Her manipulation tricks weren't working. Her beauty wasn't landing. Her lies were collapsing on impact. So she did the only thing left. She blamed. You're blowing up our entire life over a few stupid jokes and a man who doesn't mean anything to me. I shook my head slowly. No. I'm walking away from a woman who never saw me as her equal. She opened her mouth again, but I was done. Take your things, I said. Leave the dress. It belongs to a version of you I used to love. And then I walked out of the room, not even checking if she followed. Because I didn't need to. She already knew the verdict. And this time, I was the one handing down the sentence. I didn't expect anyone else to show up that night. After Skylar stormed out, face red, heels stabbing the floor like accusations, I thought that was it. That the chapter was closed. I'd drawn the line. She crossed it. Now we were just strangers with paperwork left between us. I was still in the kitchen, cleaning up the mess from the storm she left behind, paper sheets shoved off the counter, her untouched tea, a crumpled tissue she left behind like an afterthought, when the doorbell rang again. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. My first thought was that she came back. Maybe forgot something. Maybe thought she had one last card to play. I didn't answer right away. I walked to the door slowly, cautiously. This time, I checked the peephole. It wasn't Skylar. It was Laura. That stopped me cold. She stood on the porch in a black coat, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, no wine glass in hand, no mocking laughter curled on her lips. Just her, holding a manila envelope, shifting her weight from one foot to the other like she was nervous. I opened the door just a crack. Laura, she nodded. Hey, I know I shouldn't be here. I'll only take a second. Can I come in? I hesitated. This was one of the same women who sat in my car laughing about how easy I was to control. One of Skylar's three-ring circus enablers. The same friend who'd clapped along to Skylar's stories like they were open-mic comedy shows at my expense. But something in her eyes was different. So I opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in, glanced around like she half expected Skylar to appear from the hallway. She's not here, I said. We had our talk. Ended about 20 minutes ago. Laura let out a breath. Good. Then maybe you'll listen to what I have to say before throwing me out. I folded my arms. You've got 2 minutes. She held up the envelope. I came to give you this. I should have given it to you a long time ago. But I was scared. Scared of losing her, of being caught in the middle, of burning every bridge. But after what I saw tonight, after how she treated you, I realized I don't want to be part of her cover anymore. I looked at the envelope, then back at her. What is it? Proof, she said. Of everything you already suspected, and a few things you didn't. I took it and opened it slowly. Inside were printed screenshots, text threads, photo stills, copies of emails. I didn't even need to scan through them. It started 6 months ago, with Russ Carmichael. You probably figured that out already. She used to joke that if she played her cards right, she'd finally get the promotion and get out of this marriage in one move. I said nothing, just kept turning pages. Photos of Skylar and Russ at a hotel bar, more of them at a resort. A selfie of them in a bathrobe mirror, his hand clearly on her waist. Text between them planning Friday escapes. Code names like wellness meeting and vision alignment. Laura continued. The spa weekend wasn't just a spa trip. It was a celebration. Russ told her he'd fast-track her into a senior position after she filed for divorce. They were finalizing everything that weekend. Benefits, salary package, all of it. I looked up. And you knew. Her face fell. I didn't know everything. Not at first. I laughed at the jokes, yeah. I enabled it. But I thought it was just Skylar venting. Like we all do. I didn't know she was planning to leave you behind like trash at the curb. I let the silence stretch. She waited for me to scream, or tell her to leave. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching the truth lay itself bare like kindling before a match. I confronted her last week, Laura said quietly. Told her she was being cruel. That you didn't deserve to be publicly humiliated for the sake of her ego. What did she say? She laughed. Laura replied. Said I was being dramatic. That I didn't understand how boring it was to be married to someone who actually cared. She said, her voice cracked, and she swallowed. She said, let him cry. It'll make the divorce easier. The court's like sensitive guys. He can have the house. I'll have my life back. I sat down. Not because I was weak, but because the weight of it finally settled in. She didn't just fall out of love. She weaponized it. She crafted an exit strategy with precision. And she didn't care who got burned in the process. Laura took a few steps back. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I didn't want you to keep thinking you were crazy. Or weak. You were neither. You were used. I looked at her. For the first time, I saw not Skylar's echo, but a woman who had clearly been scorched by proximity to someone toxic. Her eyes were tired. Her hands were trembling. What changed? I asked. Tonight, she said. Seeing her scream like that, call you names, spin the story into you being unstable, I couldn't keep quiet. I won't be part of her fiction anymore. I nodded slowly. Thank you, I said. Not for siding with me, but for telling the truth. She turned to go. Paused at the door. She's going to come for you hard now, Laura said. When she realizes she lost control, she's going to try to spin it. She already did, I replied. She cried in the lobby at my office. Told my assistant I was emotionally abusive. Classic projection. Laura let out a dry laugh. That sounds like her. She opened the door, then looked back one last time. For what it's worth. I hope you find someone who sees you as a man, not a project. With that, she left, and the house fell silent again. I sat there with the evidence spread out in front of me like puzzle pieces. But for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel defeated. I felt something else. Clarity. I knew who I was. I knew what she did. And now, so would everyone else. I picked up my phone, opened a new email, attached the documents, typed just one sentence. The version you've heard is incomplete. Then I hit send. To her parents, her sister, her friends, my lawyer, her workplace. She betrayed me. But now, her lies were about to collapse under the weight of her own mask. And I didn't have to lift a single finger. The truth was already loud enough. The next time she reached out, her tone had changed. No more voicemails that wobbled between fury and guilt. No more texts full of sarcasm or vague threats. This time, it was a polite email, too polite. Subject line, can we settle this privately? A body full of soft, strategic language. I think we both made mistakes. I don't want this to turn into a war. Let's talk. Just us. No lawyers yet. We can be adults. I stared at the screen, rereading that phrase, just us. The same woman who paraded my humiliation like a prize now wanted to play house one more time, just until she could grab what she needed and slip out clean. I didn't respond. 3 hours later, another email came in. This one angrier, less polished. If you're trying to punish me, it won't work. I'm not scared of you. I just want to move forward. I didn't respond to that one either. Then came the offer. I'll sign whatever you want. Just unlock the accounts. There it was. The panic. The unraveling. The moment when someone who thought they held all the cards suddenly realizes the table's been flipped, and they're the only one still sitting. I talked to my lawyer the next morning. Her name was Delia Marston. Calm, sharp, and absolutely ruthless in a way that made me want to take notes. She didn't ask me if I wanted to be vindictive. She asked me what I needed to feel free. Do you want the house? She asked. I shrugged. Honestly, I'm not even sure I want the curtains. I just want a clean cut. No strings. No chances to twist this into a reconciliation attempt. Delia smiled. You're the ideal client. Clear-headed and done. She drew up the paperwork by the end of the week. When Skylar found out I had retained legal counsel, she called me 17 times in 1 hour. I let every call go to voicemail. By the 18th, I was getting messages from her sister Rachel, her coworker Angela, even her old Pilates instructor, each one carrying the same passive-aggressive tone of can't you just talk it out? Or maybe you're being too extreme. Then came the tantrum. It started with a text. You want to play hardball? Fine. Let's both lose. Then a second. Don't think people don't know what you're doing. You're trying to make me look crazy. Then the final one, 8 years. Does that mean nothing to you? That was the one that stopped me. Not because it worked, but because for a second, I remembered all the little good moments, the walks, the quiet dinners, the inside jokes that felt like secrets only we could share. But then I remembered what I'd heard, what I'd seen, what I'd become in her eyes. And the part of me that used to ache for her finally stopped aching. That night, I agreed to one final meeting, but only in the presence of Delia. We met in her downtown office. Clean white walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows that made the space feel like truth had nowhere to hide. Skylar arrived wearing her courtroom face, lip gloss sharp, hair pinned, eyes rehearsed. She didn't acknowledge Delia, barely looked at me, just took her seat and crossed her legs. Let's be reasonable, she began. We both know dragging this out helps no one. Delia opened her file. My client is already being reasonable. He's offering a no-contest divorce. No alimony. No media. You keep your car. He keeps the house. Skylar blinked. What about the savings account? Delia slid a document across the table. Already frozen. Any movement now would be considered contempt. That was when the cracks showed. Skylar's lips parted. Wait, you froze it? Delia looked over her glasses. Correct. The evidence your husband has of misappropriation of funds was sufficient. Skylar turned to me like she forgot we weren't alone. You froze our account? I met her stare without blinking. You drained it first. I just stopped the bleeding. She leaned back. You really want to do this? In front of strangers? You want to make this public? No, I said calmly. That's why I'm here with my lawyer. Because the last time I trusted you behind closed doors, I became a punchline in your group chat. Delia slid the second folder forward. These are the non-negotiables. You sign today, we both walk. No smear campaign. No public fallout. But you attempt to manipulate or defame Mr. Ellison again, and we release the full file. All of it. Every video. Every screenshot. Skylar stared at the folder. Her hand trembled. Then she slapped it off the table. The papers scattered like white feathers across the floor. Her voice rose. You think you're noble? You think you're some kind of martyr? You're pathetic, Grant. You always were. You let me walk all over you, and now you want to meddle because you finally grew a spine. Delia didn't flinch. She picked up the pages, stacked them slowly, and said with a sigh, I'm adding a restraining order clause. Skylar stood abruptly. Her final words, spoken with venom, weren't even shouted. They were whispered, like a curse. You were the easiest mistake I ever made. I stood, buttoned my coat, and replied, and you were the last one I'll ever let repeat itself. As she stormed out, Delia leaned toward me and said, Congratulations. For what? I asked. For surviving her long enough to escape. We finalized the documents that Friday. Delia filed everything with the court, and I went home to a house that now echoed with absence, but not the kind that hurts. The kind that clears space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to heal. I didn't celebrate. No drinks. No parties. Just silence. A silence I chose. One that didn't mock me, didn't talk over me, didn't make me beg for affection like a dog sitting by a door. I took a walk that evening past the lake, through the trail Skylar never liked. I watched the water reflect the gold streaks of sunset and thought about all the parts of me I'd silenced for years. The things I liked but gave up. The opinions I swallowed. The man I used to be. No more games. No more bending so someone else could feel tall. No more rescuing people who don't want to be saved, just worshipped. And for the first time in 8 years, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to anyone. I moved out a week later. Not because I was forced to. Technically, I had every right to stay in the house. But I didn't want to live among ghosts. Every room held an echo of the version of myself I'd been trained to become. The agreeable man. The fixer. The apologizer. I needed new walls. New space. A life where the air didn't carry the scent of her perfume or the chill of her silence. Hugo had a guest room. Barely furnished, half used for storage, but it might as well have been a palace to me. The mattress was lumpy, the window blinds didn't close properly, and I had to share a bathroom with his cat that hated everyone but him. Still, it was the most peaceful sleep I'd had in months. I'll only stay a few weeks, I told him when I moved in. Stay as long as you need, he replied. As long as you do one thing. What's that? He grinned. Start living for you again. That sounded simple. But when you spent 8 years shaping yourself around another person's wants, figuring out what you like feels like learning to walk with new legs. The first thing I did was clear the rest of our joint accounts. Not because I was being petty, but because Skylar was still trying to tap into them using leftover apps and linked cards. Delia handled the legal stuff, freezing what was necessary and securing everything in my name. I wasn't rich, but for once, I wasn't bleeding either. She kept spreading rumors. The first one came from Rachel, Skylar's sister, who messaged me out of the blue with a vague, backhanded attempt at reconciliation. I know things got messy, she wrote, but Skylar's telling people you were emotionally unstable, that you isolated her, that you were jealous of her success. I stared at the message for a long time. Jealous? I paid the bills. I covered her debt. I stayed home while she traveled with coworkers. I clapped through her wins even when I was breaking quietly in the background. If anything, I'd been her shadow. And now, she wanted to paint that as control. But I didn't argue. I didn't reply. I just blocked the number. Hugo called it emotional detox. I called it peace. It was a strange thing, letting people believe whatever they wanted, while you quietly outgrew their versions of you. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Skylar's dad called me. We hadn't spoken in over a year. He was a cold man, old school, suit and tie even on weekends. The kind of guy who believed success made you morally superior. I braced myself for a lecture. But his voice on the other end wasn't angry. It was quiet. Grant, he said, after a pause. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. That knocked the wind out of me. He went on. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. Skylar told us bits and pieces, but after seeing what you sent, the screenshots, the videos, it was clear. You didn't deserve that. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust myself to. She's been like this since college, he said. Manipulative. We enabled it. We covered for it. And she learned that she could rewrite the story if she just said it loud enough. She's still trying, I murmured. I know. But people are starting to see through it. He sighed. You were the only man who actually loved her for who she was. And she broke you on purpose. There was another silence between us, longer this time. Take care of yourself, Grant. And if you ever need anything, don't be a stranger. I hung up and just sat on the bed for a while. Not crying. Not smiling. Just breathing. For the first time in years, I felt like someone had truly seen me. Not as a tool. Not as a husband accessory. Not as someone to laugh at or fix or control. But as a man who did his best and deserved better. The rest of the week passed in quiet steps. I made a list of everything I wanted to do, things I had shelved for years. I signed up for a woodworking class at the community center. I reconnected with my brother, someone Skylar always dismissed as too redneck for her polished crowd. I called my mom and talked with her for over an hour without feeling like I had to lie and say we're doing fine. And I got coffee with someone new. Not a date, not a grand romance. Just a woman named Camille I met at the community garden. She complimented the way I cut weeds around the fence. I complimented her boots. She laughed. It felt easy. No roles to play. No one to impress. Just conversation. And in that moment, I realized something. Skylar had spent years convincing me I was boring. Predictable. Plain. But I was never boring. I was steady. Loyal. Consistent. I gave love without measuring it. I stayed when it would have been easier to walk. I chose peace over pride more times than I could count. And now? Now I was finally choosing myself. The divorce wasn't finalized yet. Delia said it would take a few more weeks. But I'd stopped counting the days. I didn't need a court to validate what I already knew in my bones. That chapter was closed. What remained were the pages I hadn't written yet. The next morning, I woke early. Made real breakfast. No protein powders. No meal plans. Just eggs, bacon, and toast, burnt slightly on the edges, the way I like it. I sat on Hugo's tiny porch, plate in hand, listening to the birds. And I smiled. Not a big, triumphant grin. Just a small, quiet smile. Because the man I'd lost for so long was finally coming back. It's been 6 weeks. 6 weeks since Skylar stormed out of that office with her signature flip-flops of rage and grace. 6 weeks since I packed up what was left of my pride and walked into Hugo's spare room. 6 weeks since I looked in the mirror and finally saw myself again. The divorce is nearly final now. One more court date. A few more signatures. Delia said we could do it over Zoom, but I told her I'd show up in person. I want to be there. Not out of pettiness, not for the drama, but because I owe it to the man I used to be. The one who kept showing up, even when no one noticed. Especially him. Life hasn't been perfect since she left, but it's been mine. I get up when I want. I eat what I like. I read in silence, with no one asking if I'm done yet. I take slow walks in the morning, real ones, not the we're late for brunch power marches Skylar called exercise. I breathe easier. My body feels lighter. My chest doesn't ache when the sun sets. My hands don't shake when the phone rings. I didn't expect healing to look like this. Not flashy. Not some grand, Instagrammable triumph. Just quiet peace. I still get moments, small flashes, where my brain tries to wander into old corners. Like when I pass that street downtown where we had our anniversary dinner one year, or when I hear someone laugh a little too much like Haley or Ruth. I used to brace for impact, for anger or sorrow. But now, the memories pass over me like wind. Noticeable, but no longer able to knock me down. I deleted every photo of her 2 weeks ago. Not in rage, just readiness. They didn't hurt anymore, and that's how I knew it was time. She's still trying, of course. She posts cryptic quotes on her social media about betrayal and narcissists. Her friends keep leaving little comments like, "You're so strong," and they never appreciate the good ones. And her latest story? Apparently, I had a breakdown. Skylar now says I snapped under pressure and left her for someone else. That I manipulated her. That I made up the cheating. Funny how fast the truth gets repainted when a person is drowning in the image they created. But here's the thing, I stopped correcting anyone. I don't need to. The people who know me, know. And the ones who choose not to? They were never really in my corner to begin with. You'd be surprised how many people disappear when you stop playing the nice guy who takes the hits and keeps smiling role. When I set boundaries, some folks made it clear I was only valuable when I was bendable. Now that I'm not, radio silence. But I've made space for better ones. People like Camille. Yeah, we've gone out a few more times. Still casual. Still slow. We talk about real things, books, music, what makes us feel alive. She asks questions and listens without waiting to pounce with advice. She laughs without needing someone else to look small. The other night, she told me, "You carry peace with you now. It shows in your eyes." That one sentence meant more than 8 years of being told to fix your face whenever I didn't smile on command. I haven't told her everything about Skylar yet. Not all of it. Not because I'm hiding anything, but because I want the next chapter of my life to be about me, not the woman who mistook my love for weakness. The last loose end was the house. I went back once, with Delia, just to walk through before the final papers were filed. Skylar had moved out by then. The place was empty, echoing. My footprints felt loud against the hardwood. The walls were still painted in her chosen colors. The scent of vanilla candles still clung to the air like an echo. I stood in the kitchen, the same place I used to make dinner while she scrolled through her phone, and I realized. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. Delia turned to me and said, "Want to keep it or sell it?" I said, "Let's sell it. Because I don't want a house that feels like a museum for a man I no longer am. I want new light, new windows, new air." That afternoon, Hugo met me for lunch. He clinked his beer against my glass and said, "So, you've officially ghosted your past life. What now?" I smiled. "Now I build one that actually fits." "Big plans?" "None," I said. "Just honest ones."